Okay. Hello to all. Hello, Philippines. Welcome to the our interview with Professor Emeritus Arend Lijphart. Together with us are the members of the Correct Movement. We have here our lead convener and principal co-founder, Mr. Orion Perez Dumdum, live from Singapore. And together with us, of course, yours truly from Davao Region, and Mr. Gino Garcia from Dapitan City, still in the island of Mindanao. So, uh, we are live on the personal Facebook page of Mr. Orion Perez D. And we are also live with a Facebook page at Correct Movement Mindanao, as well as in Kinventura Batingal Facebook page. So, for this morning, and let us have our the Professor Arend Lijphart. He is currently the Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of California, San Diego. So Leiphart's research focuses on comparative politics, elections and voting systems, institutions, and ethnicity, and of course politics. The type of research that we need for this, for our country, the Philippines. Gino?
And his work has had a profound impact on the study of democracy, and he is widely considered the leading authority on consociationalism. And he is the author or editor of more than a dozen books, including Democracy in Plural Societies, A Comparative Exploration, Democracies, Patterns of Majoritarian and Consensus Government in 21 Countries, Electoral Laws and Their Political Consequences, Parliamentary versus Presidential Government, and Patterns of Democracy, Government Forms, and Performance in 36 countries. Leipart has received numerous awards throughout his prestigious career in recognition of his groundbreaking research, including the Johann Skytte Prize in Political Science, the Aaron Wildavsky Book Award, and honorary doctorates by the University of Leiden, Queen's University Belfast, and the University of Ghent. And I think we'll start off with you, Orion, if you'd like to ask the first question.
Oh, yes. So, again, Professor Leipart, Professor Arendt, I wanted to thank you again for being here. And really, um, for the sake of our audience, mostly based in the Philippines, for the record, which is the better system or the better form of government? Is it the parliamentary or the presidential form of government?
Oh, I have, of course, repeatedly argued that parliamentary system is better than presidential government, and you're probably familiar with the work of Juan Lentz, who has written a major book on that, pointing out all the problems that you have with presidential government, like too much power concentrated in one person. The fact that there is a fixed term of office, so you cannot get rid of. But and several, but you're already familiar with that. With the parliamentary government, you don't have that kind of a problem. Even though I should mention, when you look around the world, there are varieties of parliamentary government, but of course the basic rule is that voters elect the legislature, and from the legislature, the legislature either elects a president or informally selects it. Basically, even though the specific rules can be different, the basic system is still the same, because I just mentioned this the problem with presidential government, that you have fixed terms. That problem, of course, can be in parliamentary government too, and I'm thinking of Norway, where in fact the term is 4 years, and it cannot be changed. So I would say the Norwegians have the right idea, They have a parliamentary government, but this idea of fixed term limits is a mistake. And most countries that have parliamentary government don't have that. In addition, the second thing that is important is the electoral system, and it is to have the best combination is parliamentary government and proportional representation. And when you look more closely at Juan Linz's work, that is really also his opinion. So that say the German system, which is parliamentary and PR, is better than the British system, which is parliamentary, but it has a single member districts. It has a majoritarian election system. Again, you can have with proportional representation, you can have different specific rules, like on the whether there is a threshold that parties have to cross to get representation, and there I have my opinions too. I think a threshold is not bad to keep out very many small parties. Say in my native country, the Netherlands, you have a very low threshold, and as a result, you do have very many tiny parties. Of course, the system in the Netherlands still works okay, but basically, I am in favor of a threshold of something like 2 or 3% not too high. The highest that I would ever recommend would be like the 5% in Germany, but I think that is already on the high side. I think that the problem with very high thresholds is that then you eliminate small party or barrier to small parties, but then the major parties get basically all the extra seats that the small parties could have gotten, and so then the problem is that if you have too high a threshold, the PR system is not really proportional anymore. So you have to kind of weigh what is the best, and that depends, of course, on the country that you are in. But basically, I would say, what of the two things that I recommend, what is the most important? I would say the most important is a parliamentary system, and then
Yes.
secondly, have proportional representation.
Great. Oh, thank you very much for that insight, Professor Arend. I did. So I wanted to touch upon slightly that comment about Norway. So when you say that Norway has a fixed 4-year term, does is that is that in total a prime minister can only be there for 4 years, or you're talking about the fact that you cannot dissolve a parliament
Right.
before its term expires?
Yeah, the second
Oh, the
possibility was
second one.
mentioned.
Okay.
So it's the fact that parliamentary elections cannot be held whenever there's a problem. You want to dissolve the legislature. No, there's a 4-year term for parliament. For the cabinet and the prime minister, that can be shorter or longer. Usually, of course, it is for the entire 4 years. So the term limit is not so much a term limit. The fixed term is
Fixed
for
term.
Parliament.
Oh, okay. That explains it. And just a question on that part, Professor Arendt. The this fixed term, how similar and how different is it from what briefly happened in the UK, where they also had a fixed term parliament? That was, they had this idea of trying to be fixed term for a time, and then they
Right.
scrapped it. How different and how similar would they be to each other?
I don't remember exactly. I think have the British perhaps already kind of abolished that
They
rule
abolished it. Yes,
again.
they
They
did.
abolished it again because it is uh, I guess the idea was to prevent too frequent elections. But I would also think that that is probably not a good idea. You should just leave that up to the particular circumstances, and say, after, if a parliament is elected and after 1 year it becomes clear that there are problems that cannot be solved in Parliament, that you really need a new election to do, then I think it is a big obstacle to say, hey, but you cannot do that. You have to stick with the Parliament that was elected at like just a year ago or so. So I would not be in favor of that kind of thing.
Okay, okay, but that totally makes sense because when opinions of the electorate do change, when the majority of people feel that this government isn't doing a good job, there has to be a change. And if there is a fixed term, you're not able to do that change at all.
Right.
I That's very right. One thing I wanted to ask, because in the Philippines, Professor, we we used to have people who had a oh, we still do, actually, we still do have people with an ulterior motive of keeping the current lousy presidential system that we have. There is one person who is an economist, and she has a TV program. I'm gonna give her name. Everybody knows who she is. um Solita Monsod, or what's her name, Winnie Monsod is her nickname. Winnie Monsod used to keep on, I'm sorry to say, but misrepresenting the facts by saying, no, presidential systems are better, blah, blah, blah. And then she would come up with misinterpreted studies. So she came up with a study. Um, she used that as her basis. It was a study by Person, Tabellini, and I forgot who else. But Person and Tabellini, I think and Torsten, Person, and Tabellini from many, many years ago, saying something about proportional representation systems being, having higher costs, having higher, I think, expenses or all that, compared to majoritarian systems. And part of that study, it said that, well, presidential systems generally are majoritarian because they are actually a winner take all type of system. So she used that as yeah, see, parliamentary systems are not as good as presidential systems, and obviously that's a lie. But how would you counter that impression, so to speak, that proportional representation systems are said to be so-called more expensive, according to I think that was the work of Torsten, Persson, and Tabellini.
Yeah, there are, of course, many studies of various things that sometimes they contradict each other.
Mhm, mhm,
It depends also on which countries are included in the study, and which time period you are looking at. So if that is changed, I mean the outcome would be changed too. The only thing that I can say with regard to my own work is I have, I guess you're familiar with my book, Patterns of Democracy,
mhm,
uh,
mhm,
which is where I do not really deal with the question of with proportional representation as such, and with the presidential versus parliamentary system. I make a distinction between between majoritarian and consensus
mhm,
democracy. Now, and then I find that consensus democracy works better than majoritarian systems. Contrary to what many people had believed, and to what I had believed myself. I thought consensus democracy might work better for democracy, for minority rights, for women's representation, for the support for democracy that you find in different countries. I have a whole series of criteria that I look at. But I was more or less expecting that for more practical things like effective government, effective policy making, and so on, that majoritarian government might have a slight advantage. What I find, however, and I measured it against I think 15 or 20 different criteria. I find majoritarian government does not work better. So consensus democracy is really better in both respects, not only for the quality of democracy, but also for effective policy making. Now, there is an indirect link, however, but when you ask, okay, who are these consensus democracies? Typically, those are countries with parliamentary government and with proportional representation. So I think basically what I found about the consensus democracy really also goes for the combination of parliamentary government and proportional representation. In my book, I give all of there's an appendix with all of the data that I use. And on my website at University of California, San Diego, there's even more. I have all of the data there. So if anybody wants to do other tests, just straightforward parliamentary versus presidential proportional representation versus majoritarian system, or what they call, plurality. Plurality. You can do that. I mean, I have not done that, and I am now 86 years old. I will very soon be 87. I am not doing this anymore. If further analysis, younger people can do that. And I have, if you want to kind of take another look or to do another test with the same data that I provide, I would say, just go ahead and do that. But basically, I am pretty well convinced that parliamentary government and proportional representation just works best. In my book, another thing that I might just mention, I have the 36 democracies that I look at. Those are the only 36 that meet my criteria of being democratic and being democratic for quite a long time. Like I forgot, I would have to look at my book again. What is it, 20 years or 30 years or something like that? So these are established democracies. Now, what would you expect? Around the world, there are a lot of presidential systems. So would you expect of these 36 democracies, there would be a lot of presidential systems? No. Out of the 36, there are 30 that are clearly parliamentary. One that is kind of in between, that is Switzerland, and only 5, and I think that is the United States, Argentina, Uruguay, South Korea, and I guess Costa Rica.
Costa Rica, yes.
that are presidential. So that also gives you an idea. When you look at the stable, established democracies, what are they? Are they mainly presidential, which is around the world? I think political systems tend to be presidential as often, or perhaps even more often, than parliamentary. But among stable democracies, the parliamentary systems are in a big majority.
Wow, and that really ties in, Professor Arendt, with a lot of what we've done. In the correct movement, we're basically trying to laymanize and popularize information that hitherto for a long time had only been confined to the academic community, particularly among social scientists, especially political scientists in comparative politics or comparative government. So I'm not a political scientist. I'm actually an IT project manager and service manager. I
Mhm.
work in the information technology sector, um, and I'm self-taught in terms of political systems, all because of my own personal frustrations with how the Philippines has lagged in terms of the rest of the region and the rest of the world as well. And so I didn't even need to do complex statistical analysis. All I did for the most part was to just take a listing of countries, ranking of countries, um, according to GDP per capita, and then I take the top 30. It's very unscientific, but it's very layman. How do you say this? Naked eye layman type. So we just take the top 30 and the bottom 30, and we can see from just looking at that, you can see that the majority, the vast majority, I think it's like 70% or whatever comes up in the top 30 are parliamentary systems. And then the bottom 30, majority of them are presidential.
Well,
And
that's a good that's a good way also to compare the two. So that makes a lot of sense, and I think even to people who are not political scientists, I think they would say, "Hey, that's an interesting difference."
indeed, we did that across so many different performance indices. We did that with human development. We did that with what do you call this? Quality of life and so many
Mhm.
different things, corruption levels and all that. It turns out least corrupt countries in the world are parliamentary, and the majority are, and then the most corrupt are presidential, et cetera, et cetera. The pattern was always the same. Global competitiveness rankings, the same thing comes out, and maybe the ranking per se is not exactly the same, but the composition of what their forms of government are tend to be pretty much consistent. That it's parliamentary systems doing better, whereas presidential systems aren't doing that well. So it really it really was very eye opening for many people when we basically presented things in that layman friendly way, but we also really used a lot of your work. We quoted you a lot, Professor Arendt, you and the late Professor Lintz as well, and even Fred Riggs and so many others. Basically, I can rattle off the names of my idols here in terms of the research that has been done. So, one of the I just wanted to comment. So more than 10 years ago, on CNN, Farid Zakaria, he said something about there was only one country at that particular point in time. I think that was 2011, I think, or 2010. He said there was only one country that had a triple A credit rating that was listed, and it's the USA. They're the only country that is presidential that has a triple A rating, a credit rating. Just I think it was 2 days ago, the news came out that the USA totally lost its AAA credit rating. And so now the top countries, there are 9 countries that have AAA credit rating on according to all three major ratings services. And that's in alphabetical order. It's Australia, Denmark, Germany, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Singapore, Sweden, and Switzerland. Of course, Switzerland is like a directorial, somewhat parliamentary type. It's not a presidential system,
No,
so there are no.
it's closer to parliamentary than
Yes, it is.
presidential.
Indeed, absolutely. It's a collective system as well, just like a parliamentary system. And in fact, when I speak with my Swiss friends, they all just call it a parliamentary system. Actually, I think in a more layman way, they just refer to it as a parliamentary system. I also note that Canada also has AAA credit rating, but it's only by two out of the main three credit rating groups. But the point is, if we include Canada, yes, again, parliamentary, but the US lost it. So there
Mhm.
are no presidential systems in this listing of countries. So yeah, it's really really interesting that that these comparisons are so obvious actually. I wanted to check with my colleagues, Keen and Gino. Do you have any questions, follow up questions that you'd like to ask as well?
Okay. Before that, Sir Ryan, no, so we would like to give a shout out to those viewers who are here. We have Mark Gerard Borromeo as well as Carlo Alfonso Realiza who have also commented on Sir Orion's account. Also, Professor Arend, there is a question from Mark Gerard Borromeo wherein he asks, how did Netherlands adopted the parliamentary system? And what were the conditions in your country prior to that adaptation?
So you're asking about in my native country, the Netherlands? That's what you're asking
Yes,
about? What are
yes.
you asking about? I couldn't quite hear.
I'm sorry. The question from our viewer is that how did Netherlands adopted the parliamentary system? He also asked what were the conditions in your native country, Netherlands, prior to its adaptation to parliamentary system.
I think it has, of course, I have been mainly interested in the situation since there was the adoption of universal suffrage, which was after the First World War. But the a basic parliamentary system was already there, I think, since about 1815. So after the Napoleonic wars, the Netherlands, which had been a republic for several, I guess, how many centuries, but two or three centuries, became a monarchy for the first time. Under the kings out from the House of Orange, and there were so the king still then had quite a bit of power, but there was a cabinet and a legislature, and I guess the big change was around 1848, 1849. When it became clear that the legislature could dismiss a prime minister that they disapproved of. But there was, of course, while the king still had considerable power, you cannot really talk about a pure parliamentary system. That only came about when gradually it was just the cabinet and the prime minister who are the real executives, and that in the democratic era, I would say, from about 1918, 1919 on. So the Netherlands, in other words, never had a presidential system.
Okay. We are concerned with that transition, sir. It's because, of course, as you know, Philippines is still yet a presidential, and we are actually looking for some countries, or we would like to seek benchmark on how did they transition from presidential to parliamentary.
Yeah.
Because historically in the Philippines, when when there is what we call uh, uh, change in regime probably is because of a revolution or some sort of there is what we call the revolution, so
A democratic
uh,
disruption, so to speak.
yeah, disruption, yeah, that's the disruption. So we are also looking for what could be the best motivation for the Philippines, that when would be the best thing to introduce, or when is the right time to introduce parliamentary system in some sort of revolution or some sort of uh, uh, what Sir
Well,
Arayon
a
said,
maybe a reform evolution also could be
reform
one way to do it.
revolution.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that now you were asking, how did the parliamentary systems come into being? Basically, in the like when you're looking at the 19th century now, most of the countries that became parliamentary were monarchies. And so the main development that took place was for the monarch to lose power and for the cabinet to gain power. So the cabinet was originally the king's cabinet, but when it became more the cabinet controlled by parliament, then it became a parliamentary system. So the thing is that having in the past been a monarchy has helped countries to become parliamentary. And if you take a different route, how to democratize, you look at the United States. They kind of abolished the king and said, "Well, we are going to have an elected king," and that's
Yes, an elected king.
the president. So there are really two answers to how do you develop in a more democratic system. One is to replace the king and elect a president. The other is, of course, for the parliament to take over the power over the cabinet. So I think in many respects it has helped to have had a monarchy. If you look at Spain. Spain could have taken a different route if it hadn't been a monarchy. So it's the monarch that actually helped Spain become democratic I think it was in the 1970s. And so if you countries that don't have that, like Portugal, they went to a presidential system, even though then, very wisely, it generally drifted toward less power for the president, more power for the parliament and cabinet. But in existing systems like the Philippines, the problem is always that politics tends to be very conservative. People want to keep things as they are, and so you have to overcome a great deal of opposition to make any changes in that. I know that in Brazil. There was for a long time, I would also say since the 1970s or so, a big movement to try to make Brazil into a parliamentary system. And I was in touch with Brazilian political scientists at that time. They finally thought, no, the only possibility would be what they call a semi-presidential system, which, of course, I don't really like semi-presidential systems because they are you never quite know where real power is located. And I know that Juan Lins was very negative about semi-presidential system. He said, "Well, better to just have a presidential system and don't work with semi-presidentialism." But fortunately for Portugal, it has moved into basically a parliamentary system. But it's very hard to change these kinds of things. It's also very hard to change the electoral system. And the one important example where it was possible to change from the British style plurality system, the single member district and plurality rule to proportional representation, and that was New Zealand in the middle of the 1990s, and that came about even though the two big parties were opposed to it, but the big parties made some mistaken, from their point of view, they made some mistakes, and so they then kind of had more or less forced to have a referendum on this question. They still tried to organize that referendum in such a way that it would likely fail. But the opposition was very united, because the difficulty with advocates of proportional representation is that they generally don't agree on which form of proportional representation is the best. So, but the PR people in New Zealand made the right decision to say, let's just decide on one proposal, and basically they proposed that the German style
The German style, yeah.
uh,
MMP.
electoral system. And so, because they were united, they managed to get it approved. And once it was approved, it's also interesting that there were still many voices, especially in the Conservative Party, who wanted to go back to the old system. But then, of course, you build in some things that make a change back very difficult. I remember, you may be interested in this one anecdote. I was in New Zealand just after the change to proportional representation, and I saw on television an interview with the prime minister, who was a conservative. And so her party was basically in favor of either abolishing or weakening the proportional system. And so she was asked, what about a specific proposal to make the proportional representation weaker? And then she said, well, you have to wait a little bit now. With proportional representation, we have gotten more women in Parliament. And the Prime Minister was a woman. uh, and so she said, we have had more women in Parliament, and that is a big advantage, isn't it? And so, what she was talking about, of course, was right. Proportional representation tends to you tend to elect more diverse group of legislators. And why was she concerned about these women in Parliament? These were now her members of Parliament, and so
Mhm.
she had to protect them too. And so, by saying, "Hey, let's just abolish it," she would be speaking against the members of Parliament that were members of her own party. And so, once you introduce a change like that, the dynamics of politics also changes. And so, in New Zealand, incidentally, of course, has not changed. I mean, they still have proportional representation, and they're a parliamentary system. So I say I congratulate New Zealand. They got it right.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you for that insight, Professor Arendt. One of our biggest concerns really is the transition, just like what Keen was saying, and I was because like what you said, the semi-presidential system is actually problematic, and there were talks about moving to that also here in over in the Philippines. People were saying, "No, let's go with that first because that's what we're used to having a strong president." And based on my own research and observation, I was thinking that maybe a semi-presidential system is only useful as a transition tool, like a what do you call this, an in between from a full presidential system towards a real parliamentary system. The semi-presidential system is really just a bridge between that, maybe I don't know, 3 or 5 year transition, and then at the end you go full parliamentary. And I recall there was work by the late Robert Elgie, from I think he's Irish, from Ireland. He was saying about semi-presidential systems that the best semi-presidential systems are the ones which have a weaker president, which in effect really we're talking about a parliamentary system, which is like, it's really a parliamentary system, just like Singapore, where Singapore is, they have a president who is elected, but in all respects and forms, it really is just a parliamentary system, because it's really the prime minister who holds executive power, and the president is really just a general figurehead although having certain strong reserve powers over the the monetary reserves. But yeah, I mean, it's that this is being an IT professional who works in active industry, where we have projects where we kind of transition from an old system to a new system. We found that, at least from the IT industry, gradualism is usually kind of the easier way to do things. And that's why I was thinking, yeah, rather than jolting people from one old system to a new system immediately, maybe there's this, okay, you're still kind of used to this old one, and then we'll move to this one with this transitional system. um that would be the semi-presidential. But on the other hand, I was thinking, in moving towards proportional representation, or a more consociational system, from what is essentially a pluralitarian majoritarian system that we have, um is it also better to, like, when we move to parliamentary, we maybe initially retain that majoritarian system, and then maybe 3 or 5 years later start introducing proportional representation aspects to it? Maybe, I don't know. I was just thinking, is this something that you might recommend, that there's a
No, not,
gradualist
no,
way of
I
doing things?
haven't specifically, but I haven't specifically talked about it or written about it. But I think you're right, and that is with regard to moving from presidential to parliamentary. That is also what these Brazilian friends of mine were thinking about. And if you can do it in such a way that the president is relative, that the prime minister is much considerably more powerful than the president, then you that is a good way to have a transition. And so Portugal, I think, would be an example of where this has happened. Obviously, it has not happened that way in France, where you have a very
Mhm.
powerful president, but still a situation where, under certain circumstances, it becomes more parliamentary and some sort of. So there is a basic instability, I think, in the French
Yes.
system. So I would not recommend that. With regard to proportional representation, you can also think of to do have some seats in parliament, some members of parliament elected by plurality,
Mhm.
and have perhaps other members elected by proportional representation, also as an in-between system. And what you could argue, if you want to do that in the Philippines, say, hey, well, perhaps we're not quite ready for full proportional representation, but let's give it a try. Let's
Mhm.
let's
Yes, yes.
let's see what happens. As long as you, I think actually it's like South Korea has that kind of system. But I
And
know,
Taiwan too. Taiwan as well. Yes, Taiwan.
yeah. So that is certainly when you're what do you what the English expression is the perfect is the enemy of the good.
That was French, right? Le bien est l'ennemi du. Ah non, le le mieux le mieux est l'ennemi du bien. So, like,
Yeah,
the perfect is the enemy of the good, and
right. Right.
yes,
But if you insist that you only want what is really best, you may not achieve it.
indeed,
If
indeed,
you're willing to compromise a little bit, then you may better achieve it. So, insisting on what is the absolutely perfect may mean that you don't move in the right direction at all.
indeed, indeed. Thank you very much for that insight, Professor Arendt. I know we're towards the tail end of the time. I know your wife will be waiting. I'm sure, Gino, you might want to ask some questions, or Keen as well. Follow.
For me, hopefully I can squeeze it in here. I think I found in your book that you observed that in one of your variables is federalism, and is federalism a part of your consensus theory? Is it important to consensus democracy?
It is. I would say if you have a situation in a country with a lot of ethnic minorities that are geographically concentrated,
Hmm.
then federalism may make sense. Uh, what I in my book also look at is whether the difference but in what I call this the federal unitary dimension. Uh, when you look at does more federal or more unitary work better in terms of all of these performance variables? It makes very little difference.
Hmm.
And I would still say, depending on what the situation is in different countries, but countries that are multi-ethnic and where you can get more peaceful relations if the different ethnic groups are geographically concentrated and can have their self-government, then that I think is may be a good idea. Say for a country like India, for instance, I would not say a unitary government makes sense. No, I think federalism makes sense.
Hmm.
For the United States, I don't really think federalism is really necessary for the United States because it's basically a kind of homogeneous country in terms of race and ethnicity.
Hmm.
Even though right now, of course, as you know, the United States is a very divided country in terms of its politics.
Yes, indeed, Professor Arendt. Yes, I and from our point of view, we were talking a lot about federalism as well. We would say essentially federalism is not for everyone. This is what I was saying. Federalism certainly is not for very small countries like Singapore, where it doesn't make
No.
sense. No, and then I said, but it makes sense for countries that are ethno-linguistically or culturally fragmented with,
Mhm.
yeah, as mentioned, each of these groups occupying different geographical areas. Or perhaps I guess what I've seen is, even though they may be homogeneous, but maybe because the distances are just wide, I guess the administration of all these different small polities are easier done when they're lumped together, uh, you know rather than like one huge government handling thousands of townships. I guess they subdivide each other to make it easier to manage, and that's what happens in the US and other places. So
Yeah,
uh
but one
yeah.
thing to mention there, even in small countries, it may make sense to have a federal system. And I'm thinking of Belgium,
Yes,
which
yes,
is a country with about 10 million people, so it's a relatively small country.
yes, yes,
Federalism makes a lot of sense for Belgium,
because
and
they are
they
divided.
do have a
Yeah.
federal system now.
Yes, yes. I totally agree. That's what I mentioned, that even if it may be a small country, but if it is ethnically fragmented, like Belgium or even Switzerland, which is also small,
Hmm.
they it makes sense for them to do that, because you have these different ethno-linguistic groups that are occupying different geographies. So yeah, it's either that or that. There's no one size fits all. I think the one size fits
Right.
all problem is getting in the way, from the point of view of some other people. Um, I think we're close to when your wife needs to meet up with you. I don't
Yeah.
know, Keen, if you have any last questions, and maybe we
No,
can.
I don't have
Yeah.
any. It was very interesting to talk with you, and I'm glad some of the questions that you asked made me think a bit more too about what the most correct answer would be.
Oh, yeah. Thank you
So
very much, Professor Arendt. Keen, Batingal, do you have anything else that you'd like to say? Keen,
I
any
guess we
questions?
are
Yeah.
almost short of time, Sir Ryan. So I
Yes.
believe we
okay,
can proceed with the answer.
Okay. Sure. Sure. So
Closing.
yeah. Yeah. Again, Professor Arendt, this is such a great honor. You cannot believe how happy I am to actually be speaking with one of my idols. I'm really, I'm really sorry to be gushing over you like this, but really, I've been reading a lot of your stuff since more than 10 years ago, and this is what we do with in the correct movement. We're we're not revolutionaries, we're basically educators. We're trying to educate our fellow Filipinos to understand why these shifts from this system to this better system are necessary, because we've found that the reason why there's always been some opposition was because people didn't know any better. There's always been some oligarchic influence over media. The media companies in the Philippines are owned by the old oligarchy, the old elites who don't want change to happen. And they flood the airwaves with such junk and misinformation that whenever, political opinions are talked about, there's always, no, we don't like this, we don't like that because this, and they give wrong information.
Right.
So it was in 2010 that I decided to join forces with some other people and create this movement, the Constitutional Reform and Rectification for Economic Competitiveness and Transformation. All spells out as correct, with the intention of really educating people so that when the time comes that there is a referendum or a move to make these changes, people are more likely to say, 80%, 90%, yes, we want these changes. So
Well,
that's what we
I hope you're right, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, thank you, and
Thank
thank you
Okay.
you.
very much for being with us. Keen, anything you'd like to say also to the good professor?
Thank you so much, Professor Aaron, for the opportunity as well as for sharing your time with us despite your busy schedule. No? We would like also to commend Brother Gino Garcia. Oh, I guess he went down.
Yeah, maybe he had a
For
problem with
making
his
this possible,
connection.
for actually making making an opportunity to meet with this making this meeting possible, and especially to Sir Orion Perez Dumdum for uh, be with us also for today's interview. Would like also to shout out to our commenters here. We have also Franco Villanova who also have comments, but unfortunately we are out of time. So I believe this would be yeah, we're going to formally close our uh,
Yes,
meeting for today. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening to those listeners live. And I hope that we can make this. By the way, after this live session, this will remain in the Facebook, so you can share it with your friends, with your relatives, to those who will wish to, you want it to make known as far as possible. As Professor Aaron is one of the reference of this movement, no, to have to effectively campaign for systemic change in this country, the Philippines. So again, to Professor Arend Lijphart, thank you so much for the time and for the wisdom that you have shared this morning and on your end this afternoon. Uh, Hopefully that we can use it to spread more awareness to our fellow Filipinos for the need of systemic change. And Sir Orion, thank you as well for the fruitful engagement with our guest of honor for this meeting.
My
all right.
pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Good
Please,
luck.
please enjoy your evening with your wife. I know it's a Friday night there, and I've been to San Diego. It's a really nice place before, and I love it. I wish I had the chance to meet with you when I was there for corporate visits from my previous companies. I hope to have a chance to meet with you in person, Professor Arendt.
Okay. The one thing I should then mention, I'm retired and I now live in San Francisco.
Oh, you're now in San Francisco. Oh, okay, okay, San Francisco.
So
Well, that is easier then because
yeah,
I think it's easier for me to visit that. We have a direct flight from the Philippines to go there, and yeah.
yeah. My address is in my email. So that there's a signature box with my name and so on, and that has my address in San Francisco is there.
That would be great. I have an aunt there I could stay with. So, yes, I look forward to that, Professor Arendt. Have a
Okay.
lovely evening,
All
and
right.
please say hello to your wife for us.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Thank
Thank,
you.
thank you
Bye
very
bye.
much, Professor. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.